What can you tell us about this legislation that has passed? There are so many questions, but I would like you to address, for example, on the industry bailout pieces, the airline bailout. Are there any brakes on this that will prevent us from seeing executives enriching themselves down the line from this?
You're exactly right, Lawrence. This will be in the third bill that's coming up, and the administration and Leader McConnell are going to announce what their proposal is tomorrow. I think there'll be bailouts of the airlines industry and other industries. And look, we can't let these industries go under, and we care a lot about the working people there. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of good people who are just earning a living. But I'd say a few things. Number one, any bailout that Democrats will support has to put the workers first. We're not going to bail out an industry and then have them cut workers, cut their salaries, and all kinds of things like that. This is for the workers above all. Second, we're going to have to put some brakes on some of these executives. The airlines industry itself did about $300 billion in stock buybacks over the last year. Money that didn't go into the company, didn't go into the workers, was simply sent out to the shareholders to raise the stock prices. That is outrageous, and we're going to have to somehow figure out how to make up for that, because the airlines shouldn't be allowed to do that in the past or in the future. And none of this can go to executive salaries or things like that. So if I had to describe what kind of rescue of the airlines industry that we would support, it's worker-friendly above all. Second, get rid of the corporate excesses, not just during this situation, but permanently.
What can you tell Americans about what is in the legislation that you passed tonight?
Well, the legislation we passed tonight does some good things. It certainly begins the way for paid sick leave and for paid family leave, but it doesn't go far enough. And in the next piece of legislation, Senators Murray and Gillibrand, Rosa DeLauro over in the House have put together much stronger legislation on paid sick leave and on paid family leave, and we're going to insist that that go into the third bill that we're debating, that we're going to start debating or start working on tomorrow. One thing that's very good in the bill that we're doing is the fact that you won't have to pay for your testing and much of your medical care. We don't need people who have the virus or think they may have the virus not showing up at the hospital at the doctor because they get a $200 or $300 bill, even with insurance, with the co-pays and the deductibles. A lot of people can't afford that. So that's a good thing that's in the bill, and it's a good start on paid leave, but we have to go much further there.
I don't know if you saw the president's press conference today, but he once again claimed that China pays the Trump tariffs when, in fact, American consumers and American companies pay every penny of the Trump tariffs. Wouldn't asking the president to remove those tariffs, which he imposed on his own, wouldn't that be instantaneous stimulus?
It might be some stimulus, but the real stimulus we need, Lawrence, and what we will insist, we have three things we're insisting on, or four things that we're insisting on in the legislation. First, any bailout be worker-friendly. I've outlined that. Second, all of those who lose their jobs should get a new form of unemployment insurance. We're calling it employment insurance. Right now, unemployment insurance doesn't cover a whole lot of people. It's hard to get, and you get paid only a small percentage of the salary that you were making when you were employed. We would have the federal government first cover many more people, have the salary be close or the same as to what you were paid while you were employed, and make it much easier and quicker to get. That will send money into the economy in a much more quick, direct way than just about anything else, and it'll go to the people who need it most. And the third thing we really need to do, Lawrence, is a Marshall Plan for our hospitals. And talking about New York City, we have a great hospital system, but I've spoken to several of the hospital executives of these big hospitals. They are short of all kinds of equipment and things that are needed. I asked a few days ago for the president to invoke something called the Defense Production Act. It's a relic, it was a relic from the Korean War, but allows the government to come in and do things. The Army Corps to build new temporary hospital tents with beds. The Army Corps to require certain companies to make the materials they need. We need ventilators. We need more beds. There's even such a shortage. One hospital told me that they're in a local hospital. There's a shortage of the swabs. So even if you got the test, if you don't have the nasal swab, you can't do it. We need to do that, and we need to improve family leave, paid family leave and paid sick leave on a permanent basis. If we can add those things to the bill that the president's asking for, and we're not sure exactly what he's asking for, we can make this worker-friendly and really help the people who need help the most.